coming to the concept of closures, right? So you all know, does anyone know what a closure is?
Hello,
Yeah.
sir. It's a combination of function together. So there is a multiple function that are used in a closure.
Hmm.
Uh, is it right?
Yeah, so that's fine, but the ideally what a closure is let's say I have a function. So I'll write a very basic code now. So I declare a value. Actually, I've already written one code. Let's try to take that as an example. That will be similar to what topic that I want to cover in the next part. So this function, let's take a look at this function. So what it is doing is we are initializing a range iterator. It is taking two arguments, right? One is start equal to 0, end equal to 0. So whoever is very new to JavaScript, just understand that this equal to 0 and equal to 5 are the default values. Okay, if I don't supply any arguments, it will just take 0 as the start value and end 5 as the end value. Okay, now how this is a closure? So because at the end there is a outer function which is a parent function, and it has a inner function as well, right? So there is an inner function as well which is being returned from the outer function. Now can anyone explain me how this code will execute? Like I told you about the execution context, right? So what will happen? Just go ahead by explaining line. Of course, it starts executing from the line one, and then what all happens? What all it stores in the memory? What all it executes? So uh, can anyone take a guess on that? Shall I point out? Anshul, just let's start with you. Like, try to guess, like, how will the execution start? Like, I talked about the execution context, right? So there is obviously the global execution context which is present, and then what all happens in the code? Like, based on the code, what all will happen here? Can you point it out?
Like the parent function will not go out of the memory, it will stay in the memory.
No, let's start with the very basic thing. So I talked about having this thing, right? So so once the code is getting executed from the line one, what will happen on the line one
Uh,
when we
the,
are at the
ra-
line one?
the range iterator function will go to the memory,
Yes.
and then
Okay. Range iterator will go into the memory, and it will be storing what?
uh, storing what, like
It will be storing the definition of my function, right?
yes, definition of the function, right?
Okay. So it will just store this function, the complete whatever the code is. Okay. It
Code
will
is, yes.
not do anything. It will just store it in the memory. Now, next line number 17. Who wants to take the next attempt?
The range and
Mhm.
variable will be saved in the memory, and the range iterator function will be called.
Okay. So this
It will move the
becomes
call
like,
stress.
let me present it in the diagram as well. So we will have range, but do we have any value assigned to it yet?
No,
No.
we
So it
don't have.
basically depends on the value of range depends on what? The calling of this function, right?
Yes, yes,
So on this, on the left hand side, we'll be calling this range iterator function.
right.
Fine.
It will go to the
Okay.
call
So
stack.
as soon as the we call range iterator function, what will happen?
It will create its own scope like memory and the calling stack of
Correct.
its own.
Yes. So it is going to create its own execution context. Correct.
Execution, right.
So, and it's not getting adjusted well. Anyway, so just understand that when you call the another function, the same kind of like we whatever we had in the global context, the same kind of execution context will be created for our range iterator function as well. Correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, 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 right.
Yeah. So the same kind of execution context is created over here. Now what happens? Let me go back to the code. Just let me just adjust this thing. Okay. So a new execution context is created, which is specific to the range iterator. Now what happens in the code? Now when I call this function, my thread of execution. So I told you that JavaScript is single threaded. So there is only one thread and it can do only one thing at a time. So the thread of execution sees that, okay, I need to call range iterator function. So the thread of execution will now be at line number 2. Now what happens here?
Uh, for the range iterator context, it will
Mhm.
store the value and
Awesome.
a value of variable.
Yeah. So it will store value here. But one thing that we forgot is what? Does the code directly get into this?
Uh, Anything related to the arguments that we pass?
Yes, yes. So since we have not passed anything, we have assigned default values as start equal to 0 and end equal to 5. Before the value is created, we will have the start and end values will be created. So start will be created with the value 0
Zero.
and end will be created with the value 5.
Right.
So this is the first thing that will happen. We have to handle our arguments in some way, right? So this is the way we will handle it. So in the memory now I have start 0 and 0, and we have a value which is currently pointing to start. So it is also storing 0,
Zero.
correct?
Right.
Okay. Now what? So what happens next?
Now, we are returning the
Yes.
function.
So now what we are doing, so I'll take up from here. So good job, Anshul. So Ayush, who was currently answering, Anshul Jain, right? All
Right.
right. So that's completely right, whatever you explained so far. So this is how the code of our execution of the code will happen. It will create a range iterator, store the function definition in it, and the range value is not yet here. So it is not ideally present in the memory, but for our understanding, we are basically keeping it here so that we know that whenever this thing returns, it will store the value inside my range. Correct? So this is what we are currently is happening. Now, what happens with this range iterator is as soon as you encounter return, it is returning an object, right? So as soon as you encounter a return, it is immediately gonna return this object and store it inside my range, correct? Because this is what is being called, right? So this range iterator will be completely replaced by this object. But what will happen with value? Okay. So what will happen with value? So ideally what happens in JavaScript is if you come out of the function, it will basically clean the garbage collector of JavaScript will clear the storage and the memory, whatever it created. So ideally all these values after the function execution is complete, all these values should be cleared out by the garbage collector. But in the case of closure, it is very important point, and in interviews will be asked, why do you think that a closure, in closure, the return function is still able to maintain the context of the outer parent variable, though the execution has completed for the parent function, right? So this is a very important point. Just understand that ideally, in ideal scenario, not talking about the closure, what will happen is uh, once the function execution is complete, whatever the variables that were created in the memory for execution of that function, those will be cleared out from the memory as part of the garbage collection. Okay. So if you want to understand about garbage collection, I've already done a video on my YouTube channel. So what garbage collection essentially is, I'll just point some basic things that it garbage collection will check the references of the of the data that is in the memory. Okay, so if the data in the memory has 0 references, it will clear out the space. Okay, if the data has references, then it will not clear out the space. Okay, so garbage collection will see that, okay, there is something in the execution context which is still referring to this memory. Then it will say that, okay, it is not yet ready for garbage collection, so it will let it be there. So that's what exactly happens inside my closure. So once I return this function, you'll notice that the function that is getting returned also already has a reference to value, right? It also has reference to end. Okay, so what all will be cleared from the memory? Only the start will be cleared from the memory. The rest of it, which is having the reference, will not be cleared from the memory, and hence the function, when we execute this function, it is still going to maintain the reference to the value, and whatever the value updates that we do, it will happen on this particular value. Okay, it is still having the access to that, and since the references are not completely removed, it will continue having the access to that. Rest start will be moved out of the memory because start is not having any context. So that's the entire concept about closure. So the reason how closure works, so some people find it mystery that, okay, by though it is out of the context, how is it able to still access the values that were defined in the function? So that happens because of our garbage collection algorithm, which says that, okay, if it is if the values are still having the references, I'm not going to clear that. And that's exactly what is happening. So this particular function is still having the references to the value, and hence it is not going to clear it out, and hence we'll be able to perform all these things. Okay, so any doubts here?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can you
Yeah.
please explain? I mean, when can we use the closure? Like we can do it by, calling different functions, right? Is it? I mean,
Mhm.
when we actually use the closure?
Don't think that closure is something which is just asked in the interviews. It will be used a lot, and I'll right now I will demonstrate you also how these small concepts, the building, so these are the building blocks of JavaScript. So we started with a simple function, then we talked about closure. Now when we go into the concepts of generator, promises, that time you'll see how this small concept was later used to make generators, when it was later used to make async await and all these things. Okay, so for now, just understand this much.